What is up? Today we are going to look into the truth behind the protests happening in Israel and actually all over the world. See, we have recently a lot of Haredi Jews have been protesting conscription into the IDF, which of course is relevant to this story today because all of the information surrounding this entire topic has to do with where this world is going with this war with Iran, and also how the Israelis are taking the southern front of Lebanon, all of this stuff. So I wanted to investigate it and just kind of look into it. I was curious about it. So let's see. What do you guys think? Be sure to leave your thoughts below. Like, share, comment, and subscribe. And again, what are your thoughts on the Haredi Jews who are protesting conscription into the IDF military? We know that almost 80%, just about, we're going to look into the statistics of Jews have been supportive of the Palestinian displacements with this entire war in Gaza and everything that's happened there, and as well as Lebanon. So it's interesting to see that they're not really too excited to be fighting. And they believe that a lot of this has to do with, really it's interfering on their ability to study Torah and to focus on the more rabbinical path of Judaism in their subjective minds and in their realities. So let's take a look at everything. We're going to jump right in. So again, this is the video we're going to be watching. This comes from the Time of India on YouTube. Again, be sure to leave your thoughts, like, share, comment, subscribe, and hopefully you guys are ready for this episode. So again, let's dig right in. I thought this was pretty crazy. So
we advocate for Judaism and they advocate for Zionism. We should advocate for keeping the Torah and commandments, and they advocate for nationalism, the army, and other things. We do not want to be a part of that.
Chaos erupted on the streets of Israel as a long-simmering battle over military service exploded into open confrontation. Thousands of ultra-Orthodox Jewish protesters poured onto major roads across central Israel, bringing traffic to a standstill and turning busy highways into scenes of unrest. Dramatic images emerged from areas near Tel Aviv and the ultra-Orthodox stronghold of Bnei Brak, where demonstrators occupied roadways, blocked critical intersections, and staged mass acts of defiance against the state. The unrest was triggered after Israeli authorities transferred 19 alleged draft evaders into military custody following their arrest during clashes outside the residence of a senior Supreme Court judge. But what began as outrage over the arrests quickly snowballed into a much larger protest movement against military conscription. As tensions escalated, protesters sat across highways and chanted slogans denouncing efforts to enlist Haredi men into the armed forces.
I just created simple product videos for all these different products using Veo,
I'm never signing up for YouTube
No API
Premium,
keys to connect.
so
all the models are built right
sometimes
into
we have to watch.
You don't need to start with professional photos. I just took pictures of random.
Insane.
Police moved in to break up the demonstrations, with officers seen physically dragging protesters from roads while confrontations unfolded in full public view. For nearly 2 hours, some of Israel's busiest transportation arteries were brought to a near-complete halt, creating widespread disruption and exposing deep divisions within Israeli society. The chaos also turned dangerous. Emergency responders reported that at least 2 protesters were injured in separate incidents involving vehicles near the demonstrations, including a 93-year-old man. Meanwhile, police accused some protesters of attacking officers, hurling objects, and refusing repeated orders to disperse.
I think this is so crazy because when you actually look at this, you know, you have these ultra-Orthodox Jews, and there's different kinds of Jews. You know, you have ultra-Orthodox Jews and Hasidic Jews who are pretty much the guys you see wearing the hats, and they're wearing the garments. And then you have the IDF, which is like your modernized Jews, typically, I guess you could classify it as that. And many of these Jews are males, females today, and they're more tech, Tel Aviv-based, and they've kind of just joined the military because that's part of what they do. You kind of choose a path, I guess. And a lot of these guys, the ultra-Orthodox guys, apparently, they believe that they have actual biblical lineage, so that's why they choose this rabbinical path. And so now it's interesting to see that the clashes are happening between these 2 different kinds of Jews. And you have, again, more of the modernized Jews, and then you have the ultra-Orthodox Jews. At least that's what it looks like to me. I mean, I'm just an American. But when I look at this, it's kind of interesting. Okay, you got the same people who were very for all of the, you know, this entire The entire thing we're seeing in Gaza right now, everything you're seeing in Lebanon, they're all for that. And they're all for the Iran war, but they don't want to go and fight in the war. And I find that to be very interesting. Very fascinating indeed. Okay, so again, kind of interesting.
The dramatic showdown has once again thrust one of Israel's most explosive domestic disputes into the spotlight, highlighting growing tensions over who should serve in the military as the nation grapples with mounting security challenges and internal divisions.
19 detainees, some have been released and some are going to be sent to military prison, and that is what we are fighting against, that they won't be imprisoned. We are going to prevent this by all the means we have, in every way we have. Of course, not with violence, in the ways accepted in the state of Israel as established.
At the heart of the crisis is one of the most explosive issues in Israeli politics. Military service is mandatory under Israeli law. Yet, for decades, many ultra-Orthodox men have received exemptions, allowing them to pursue full-time religious studies instead of serving in the armed forces. That arrangement is now under unprecedented pressure. A landmark court ruling declared that ultra-Orthodox men must be drafted, while the Israeli military warns it is facing a severe manpower shortage after nearly 2 years of fighting on multiple fronts following the Hamas-led October 7th attack.
And what's interesting about this, again, you have this entire war happening in Iran, and also another front happening, another multi-domain war happening on the southern border of Lebanon. And then, of course, you have a lot of the Jews that you will see coming to the United States. We actually have a lot of Jews that live in Lakewood, New Jersey, and Tyler Oliveira ended up covering that entire story. And so it's really interesting to see how this is kind of all playing out, for sure. So again, what do you think of this? I mean, this is kind of wild.
The debate has fractured Israeli society. Critics argue that all citizens must share the burden of national defense, especially as Israeli troops continue operations in Gaza and confront threats across the region. But ultra-Orthodox leaders insist military service threatens their religious way of life and are demanding legislation that would permanently protect draft exemptions. The dispute is also testing the stability of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition government. Ultra-Orthodox parties are pushing for legal guarantees shielding their communities from conscription, while Netanyahu's right-wing allies and opposition lawmakers increasingly demand equal military obligations.
Facial expression over here is just kind of crazy.
Communities from conscription, while Netanyahu's right-wing allies.
This dude over here, he's just like, man, we know the cameras are watching. Let's just make this look as crazy as possible.
And opposition lawmakers increasingly demand equal military obligations for all.
What did that sign say? Hold on. Let's see that.
Communities from conscription, while Netanyahu's right-wing allies and opposition lawmakers increasingly demand equal military obligations for.
The very existence of Zionist state and its impure military is contrary to Torah. Is that what it says? Torah?
Increasingly demand equal military obligations for all Israelis.
20 hours back every week just by delegating boring tasks.
So again, what do you think about this? Again, it's crazy that when you see these Israelis, again, they're all for taking Gaza and they're for taking Lebanon, about 80 to 90% of them, but they don't want to fight, and they want the Americans to fight, and they want to, and again, Hezbollah has been hitting pretty hard.
These assistants are the best of the best, highly vetted, top 1% of applicants, proactive.
She handles my company's bookkeeping.
Anger is mounting on Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and this time it is coming from within. Chaotic scenes unfolded across Jerusalem and Beit Shemesh as hundreds of ultra-Orthodox Jewish men took to the streets in a furious protest against the arrest of alleged draft dodgers. The demonstrations quickly spiraled into violent clashes with police. According to Israeli police and Hebrew media reports, rioters repeatedly attempted to advance toward the police station in Jerusalem's Russian compound, but were pushed back by security forces. The most intense confrontations unfolded in the central Israeli city of Beit Shemesh. Protesters hurled stones and other objects at police officers, while security forces responded with crowd control measures in an effort to restore order. law enforcement personnel, including units of the border police, remained deployed well into the night as authorities struggled to disperse the crowds. According to the Ynet outlet, some protesters attempted to break down the gates of a police station while demanding the release of demonstrators arrested during earlier unrest outside the home of Israeli Supreme Court Deputy President Noam Solberg. The report also said a secular Israeli civilian was injured during the violence. The man, who declined to identify himself, said he was kicked in the head by rioters.
They sprayed them with water. They're just dancing. That's funny.
What made the unrest particularly striking was its timing. The demonstrations took place on the Jewish Sabbath, a day traditionally reserved for rest and religious observance when Jewish law generally prohibits work and public activity. The rare Sabbath protests underscore the depth of anger within segments of Israel's ultra-Orthodox community over the military draft issue. Israel has witnessed repeated demonstrations by Haredi groups since authorities intensified efforts to enforce military conscription among draft evaders. The controversy intensified in 2024 when Israel's High Court issued a landmark ruling ending the long-standing exemption that had allowed many ultra-Orthodox men to avoid mandatory military service. The issue has become increasingly sensitive as Israel continues to face security challenges on multiple fronts following the Hamas-led October 7, 2023 attack. Military leaders have repeatedly warned of critical manpower shortages, adding pressure on the government to expand conscription. Wednesday's unrest was triggered by an earlier protest outside the home of Justice Noam Solberg in the Alan Shvut settlement. According to reports, dozens of Haredi demonstrators smashed windows, destroyed flower pots near the entrance, shattered a vehicle windshield, and displayed a small Israeli flag bearing a swastika in.
We would rather die as Jews than as Zionists. This one person has a sign up that says. And then the other sign says, we refuse to serve an army for the sake of the Zionist religion. Very interesting. So they're calling Netanyahu's government the Zionist religion. They're standing against this. Maybe it's a psyop. At the end of the day, maybe this is all for optics. These are, I mean, obviously, we understand that the Israelis know what's going on. They understand that this war is pretty much heating up. And Trump has said that there's a peace deal, allegedly, and that's going to take place. But the Iranians said, no, there is no such peace deal. And until there is peace for the people of Gaza and the people of Lebanon, then this is going to continue on. And so when I see this, I find it to be extremely interesting because, again, you have different sects of Judaism, and it's important to distinguish between these different kinds of Jews. So, again, who knows if this is more about optics, maybe if this is psychological warfare, maybe this is more of a, maybe this is kind of an attempt to pretty much, sway the masses that, oh yeah, don't worry, we're not for all of this that's happening in Gaza, and then really it's supposed to be for optics. But then again, who knows? I mean, it does look like for real that they're actually protesting being conscripted into the military. They don't want to fight in the military, and that's why they're holding up these signs ultimately. But they want the Goyim, that's what they call non-Jews. They want the Goyim, or the Americans, to go over there, and they want us to fight their wars. And they want to integrate with the U.S. military. And it's kind of dangerous when you look at that. And so, who are the Zionists, and then who are the Jews who are truly standing against all of it? Again, is this an entire psyop? In the background, we have another sign here. Looks like I can't really read all of it. It says, if I had to choose between blah, 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 my son entering the army or dying as he did, I would prefer... Yeah, you can't really see the whole
Star of David.
Interesting.
Police arrested 62 people in connection with that incident, drawing condemnation from across Israeli political spectrum. The latest violence follows a series of increasingly confrontational protests.
I bet they lived in Lakewood, New Jersey right now.
Ultra-Orthodox demonstrators stormed a police compound in Beit Shemesh and clashed with officers. In April, members of the radical Jerusalem faction reportedly broke into the home of Israel's military police chief while his family was inside. As the war continues and the military seeks more recruits, the battle over conscription is rapidly becoming one of the most explosive political and social fault lines inside Israel, fueling unrest, deepening divisions, and creating a new challenge for Netanyahu's government at a time of mounting national pressure.
Every engineering team is running AI tools.
So
Most
again,
can't measure the ROI.
really weird to see that this entire
GitHub
war
Copilot,
that's
Claude
really
Code,
seems to
Cursor.
be heating up.
Which one is
Netanyahu's
delivering
hitting
measurable
the Iranians,
productivity impact?
The Iranians are hitting them right
DX
back.
tracks the
The
percentage of
Iranians
AI
are, or
authored
basically
code by
Hezbollah
commit,
is standing
by
up
repo,
against the
by
Israelis,
team, across
standing for
every
the people
tool
of
you
Gaza
run.
and Palestine, and then for the
And when you
people of Lebanon
correlate
as
that
well.
with delivery data,
And so
you can see
have all of that
exactly what
happening.
changed.
And then most of
Before
the
AI,
Jews overall support
after
those
AI.
movements, but they also
Dropbox,
don't want to fight in
Lego,
the same war.
Adyen,
So
and more of
I
the
find
world's
this all to
top
be extremely interesting here. Let's get back to it. All because they don't want to fight. They don't want to fight in their own war. It's the weirdest thing, really.
Chaos exploded at the main western entrance to Jerusalem. There was an absolute paralysis gripping the city, as thousands of ultra-Orthodox Jews choked a major transit intersection to protest mounting legislative pressure to strip them of their long-standing military draft exemptions. Israeli border police rushed to clear hundreds of ultra-Orthodox Jewish demonstrators who participated in the aggressive sit-in. The situation rapidly deteriorated into hand-to-hand combat. Clashes broke out across the blacktop as lines of police officers advanced, trying to pry locked bodies apart while demonstrators fiercely pushed back. The defiance on the ground escalated as angry crowds began swarming and actively chasing a moving police water cannon truck, screaming chants against the mandatory conscription efforts. In response, authorities unleashed the high-pressure system. Jets of foul-smelling liquid, commonly known as skunk water, blasted into the gathering, sending repeated bursts into the front lines. While military service is strictly mandatory by Israeli law, the ultra-Orthodox community has successfully maintained widespread exemptions for decades, a privilege their political parties are now fighting to legally cement. But secular right-wing coalition partners and opposition parties are demanding the ultra-Orthodox share the burden of national defense after 2 years of high-intensity warfare in Gaza and Lebanon. As this vital Jerusalem intersection slowly cleared, the explosive scene exposes a deepening social fracture that threatens to shatter the country's wartime government from the inside out.
Fascinating developments, to say the least. So again, when we look at this entire story, again, I also wanted to look at a few different articles here. Okay, so again, when we look at the actual conversation swirling on X, you would actually have to do the research on what's really going on here. So the video from the Times of India titled something like, Tel Aviv on edge, we ain't joining the IDF, mass protests turn violent as Bibi refuses to budge, shows recent, around June 2026, protests by ultra-Orthodox Haredi Jews in Israel. Hundreds, sometimes thousands in related events of Haredi men block major highways, intersections, and rail lines in areas like Tel Aviv, Bnei Brak, and Jerusalem. They sit on or stand in roads, chant against conscription, and clash with police who use mounted units, water cannons, pepper spray, and physical force to clear them. Protesters throw objects. Some incidents involve injuries, including to a 93-year-old protester hit by a vehicle. The unrest stems from arrests of alleged draft invaders and broader enforcement following court rulings. The video includes footage of chaos, police dragging people, traffic paralysis, and interviews with protesters emphasizing their commitment to Torah study over military service. Why the divide in protests over military conscription? Israel has mandatory conscription for most Jewish citizens, men 32 months, women 24 months, plus reserves. Haredi men have enjoyed a long-standing exemption dating to Israel's founding in 1948 under the Torado Umanudo principle. His Torah is his occupation, so they can study full-time in yeshivas. Supreme Court rulings, notably 2024. declared blanket exemptions unlawful, ordering, drafting, and cutting funding for non-compliant yeshivas. Manpower shortages after the October 7, 2023 war and ongoing conflicts intensified pressure. Haredi leaders and communities view military service as a threat to their insular religious lifestyle, risk or secularization, mixed gender environments, time away from study/prayer. Many see full-time Torah study as their contribution to Israel's spiritual defense. Broader Israel society, especially secular and many non-traditional Jews, see this as unfair burden sharing. Non-Haredi Jews serve with the Haredim, a fast-growing 13 to 14% of the population with high birth rates, often rely on state subsidies, have lower workforce participation, especially men, and pay less tax on average. This fuels resentment, particularly with extended reserve duty for others. Interesting. Protests involve road blockades, riots outside judges' homes, and political pressure on Netanyahu's coalition. Haredi parties demand exemptions, others push for equality. This risks government collapse and highlights deep societal rifts. So really interesting here. Different types of Jews in the video and in Israel today. So this video primarily features Haredi ultra-Orthodox protesters, men in black hats, coats, side locks, or payat, and modest attire, often from Ashkenazi Hasidic or Lativish backgrounds. They contrast with police and implied secular critics. Israeli Jews, the vast majority of the Jewish population, self-identify as a religious observance spectrum, not exactly like U.S. denominations. Haredi ultra-Orthodox, 10 to 14%. Most devout. So basically, these are different kinds of Jews here. Strict adherence to halakha, Jewish law, large families, average of 6+ children, separate education, minimal secular subjects, limited secular workforce integration for men, insular communities. Many oppose Zionism in principle or its secular form, or prioritize Torah over state. Fastest growing group, significant political power via parties. Subgroups include Hasidic, which are your charismatic leaders, Lativish, yeshiva focused, and some Sephardi Haredim. Then you have your Dati Jews, your Dati, religious/modern Orthodox/Dati Lumi, or national religious, 10 to 16%. Observant, kashrut, Shabbat, prayer, but integrated into modern life, Zionism, army, workforce, and universities. Often wear a knitted kipput, or yarmulkes, strong in settlements, serve in the elite IDF units. Balance religion and state/nationalism. So that's pretty much what you were seeing in the video. You were seeing a lot of those Dati kind of Jews there. A lot of the people who work for the IDF. And then again, you also have your Masorti, which is your traditional 20 to 25%. This is like your middle ground, apparently. Recent tradition, culturally, holidays, some rituals, but not strictly observant, may drive on Shabbat. Diverse, often Mizrahi heritage, more conservative socially than secular, but less rigid than Dati. And then you have your Hiloni Jews, which is your secular Jews. This would be like Larry Ellison and a lot of the American Jews you see today, 40 to 45%. Least observant, these Jews are by culture, ethnicity, and nationality often atheist or agnostic. Fully integrated, drive the economy/tech/military. May celebrate holidays culturally, strongest resentment towards Haredi exemptions. So maybe, again, these could have been a lot of your different kinds of IDF soldiers, maybe your police officers that we saw in that video there. So your ethnic layers overlay this. Ashkenazi, European origins, historically more secular/elite. And then your Mizrahi, I don't know how to pronounce that, Middle Eastern/North African, often more traditional/Masorti or religious, and smaller Sephardi, which is your Iberian roots and sometimes overlapping with Mizrahi or other Ethiopian. So then you also have Haredim, often, but not only, Ashkenazi, Mizrahim, lean, Masorti/Dati. Why fighting? So the core tension is that Haredim want a theoretic learning society preserving their way of life with state support. Most others want a more secular, democratic, shared burden state. Demographics Haredi growth amplify fears of future economic/military strain. Politics show us that the Haredi parties often kingmakers in coalitions. So the comparisons to American Jews. American Jews are about 6 to 7 million in the United States out of our 350 million population, 340 million roughly. Denominations, Reform, 35% progressive, adaptive to modernity. Conservative are about 18% in the middle, and then Orthodox is about 10%. So again, your Orthodox would be like your the Lakewood Jews that you saw in Tyler Oliveira's video, including modern Orthodox and growing Haredi / Ultra-Orthodox. Many just Jewish, unaffiliated. 30% plus is that portion. No direct equivalent to Israelis' Hiloni or Masorti spectrum. Identity is more voluntary / denominational. So then you have observance and politics. American Jews are overwhelmingly liberal / democratic, focused on social justice, reform / conservative pluralism. Israeli Jews, or your Haredi / Dati Jews, are more particularist, nationalist, and range rightward. American Orthodox resemble Israelis, Dati / Haredi more than the average U.S. Jew. Military / state. No conscription. U.S. Jews see Judaism as religion / culture, not tied to a Jewish state obligation. Israelis live Jewish identity nationally. So again, security, Hebrew, holidays as national. Demographics, U.S. Jews are older, smaller families, highly educated / professional, mostly Ashkenazi. Israeli Jews, younger, higher birth rates, Haredi / Mizrahi, and ethnically diverse. So Mizrahi, majority or plurality. And then tensions. American Jews often criticize Israeli policies, religious state / occupation, for a diaspora or liberal lens. Israelis see this as out of touch. Shared peoplehood exists, but lived realities diverge sharply. In short, the video captures the flashpoint in Israel's internal culture war over identity, burden sharing, and the state's Jewish versus democratic character. A divide rooted in decades of exemptions, now clashing with secure realities. So that's pretty wild when you look at all of that. That's kind of crazy. What do you think of that? Ultimately, when you look at this, I kind of went, how many of these same Jews in total protesting conscription also supported the displacement of Palestinians in Gaza and the buffer zone being taken in southern Lebanon today by the IDF? No precise total number exists, as polls do not track these exact subsets of Haredi or Ultra-Orthodox Jews protesters against conscription who also back the specific IDF actions like Palestinian displacement in Gaza or southern Lebanon buffer zones. So again, in this video, just remember, we saw a lot of these Jews who were anti-Zionist, it appeared, from their signs and the protests. Now they're saying this. But when we look at these numbers, it's a lot different than what we were seeing on the screen there. However, available survey data and political context show strong overlap in attitudes among broader Haredi community. Haredim make up roughly 13 to 14% of Israel's population, 1.3 to 1.5 million people, with hundreds of thousands of draft-age men in protesting demographic. Their political parties, the Shas, United Torah Judaism, have long been coalition partners in right-leaning governments and supported or tolerated in aggressive security policies, even while fiercely opposing their own conscription. So, look at this. Gaza displacement / expulsion. A March 2025 Penn State / geocartography poll, weighted to include Haredim, found 82% of Jewish Israelis overall supported expelling / transferring Gazans to other countries. So, even though we have these protests now, what are they really protesting? Well, it appears that they're really protesting being conscripted into the military. They don't want to be conscripted into the military, right? And so that's kind of what we're seeing. And then support among Masortim Jews, your traditional Jews, or your religious Dati Jews, or Ultra-Orthodox Haredi Jews communities exceeded 90%. Secular Jews were lower, 70%, but still a majority. Haredim often align with or exceed the most hawkish segments on such issues due to religious nationalist framing, biblical references, security maximalism. Broader Gaza war support. Haredi leaders and communities largely back Israel's military response post-October 7th, 2023, viewing it as defensive against extremist threats. Some Haredi MKs questioned prolonged fighting or called for hostage deals earlier, but overall community sentiment mirrored the Jewish-Israeli majority in supporting operations against Hamas. Lebanon buffer zone / IDF operations. April 2026 Israel Democracy Institute polling showed 80% of Jewish Israelis supported continuing fighting against Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, even risking U.S. friction, with strong majorities across right/center and religious groups. Haredi, as part of the right-wing coalition ecosystem aligned here, religious sectors, including Haredi, tend toward hawkish security views on threats like Hezbollah. Haredi are not monolithic. Many of these non-Zionists are anti-Zionist in ideology, prioritizing Torah study and spiritual protection over military service. So again, that's kind of the most important part of the distinction here. Like, why are they protesting against their government? It's not because they're protesting against the Zionist regime. Essentially, no. It's not really because they're protesting against what's happening in Gaza or Lebanon. Maybe some are, and, God bless them for that. But ultimately, this is the real reason that you see highlighted on the screen: prioritizing Torah study and spiritual protection over military service. Okay, so that's really the main reason that you're seeing a lot of these protests. And some prefer ending wars for stability. So again, that's another reason you'll see some of these conscriptions. That's why you'll see a lot of these Jews opposing this. A minority volunteer or serve in special Haredi IDF units. However, their political representatives have enabled and sustained policies involving Gaza operations and Lebanon buffer efforts. Why the apparent contradiction? Protesting conscription, but supporting hardline policies. Theological/practical split is one of the answers. Haredi see full-time Torah study as vital to Israel's divine protection and fear military service will secularize their youth amidst units' exposure to modern life. They view other Jews fighting to defend the state while claiming their role as spiritual. So again, they really just want to focus on Torah study. They want to basically collect benefits from the government, from the Israeli government, or here in America, the U.S. government. They don't want to work, but they want to have, 6+ kids, while, more secular Jews in that area, your Dati Jews and those kind of Jews, your traditional Jews, they are pretty much the ones that you see fighting in the IDF. So there's these two different kinds of groups. There's different kinds of groups, different, different sects of Judaism. Okay, so again, when we look at this, they support other Jews fighting to defend the state while claiming their role as spiritual. Political pragmatism. Haredi parties extract benefits, funding, exemptions from coalitions that pursue right-wing security/settlement policies. Post-October 7th manpower shortages amplified tensions, but core attitudes on threats from Hamas/Hezbollah remain hardline. Not all protesters are identical. Street protesters are often the most insular. Broader community polls capture wider sentiment. In summary, a large majority, likely 80 to 90% based on the breakdowns of the Haredi population, including many involving in a sympathetic or conscription protest, supports or at least does not oppose aggressive IDF actions in Gaza and Lebanon. So again, that's a really important statement. Likely 80 to 90% based on the breakdowns of Haredi population, again, including many involved in the sympathetic or conscription protest, supports or at least does not oppose aggressive IDF actions in Gaza and Lebanon. So again, this reflects Israel's broader Jewish public opinions trends rather than a unique Haredi outlier. Exactly how many of active protesters is unknowable without targeted surveying, but the overlap is substantial due to shared threat perceptions. These divides highlight Israel's internal tensions, security, unity, or external threats versus deep rifts over who serves. So, I kind of kept going here. What is the specific law of the Israeli government requiring this conscription? What are the typical charges for refusal to enlist and fight? The primary law in the Israeli Defense Service Law, also called the Security Service Law or Israeli Security Service Law, specifically is consolidated version of 1986, the Defense Service Law, consolidated version 5746 to 1986. So, this law, originating from the 1949 Defense Service Law passed shortly after Israel's founding, mandates compulsory military services for most Israeli citizens and residents. It requires eligible individuals, primarily Jewish men and women, Druze men, and Circassian men, to report for service upon reaching military age, generally 18. Key provisions. It covers conscription age, typically 18 to 29 for men, 18 to 26 for women, per the Hebrew calendar. Service duration, currently 32 months for men, 24 months for women, with variations. Exemptions, with certain religious women, medical/psychological reasons, or ministerial discretion and enforcement mechanisms. The Minister of Defense has authority under the law to issue draft orders, and it includes rules for reserves, deferrals, and penalties for non-compliance. Supreme Court rulings, notably in 2024, have affirmed that this law applies without blanket exemptions for Haredi yeshiva students, ending prior deferral arrangements that lacked statutory backing. This is not a basic law in Israel's constitutional hierarchy, but a regular statute that has been amended multiple times. Typical charges and penalties for refusal to enlist. Refusal to enlist, draft evasion, or draft dodging is treated as a criminal offense under the Defense Service Law and Military Justice Law. It is a continuing offense with no statute of limitations while the evasion persists. Process and sanctions, especially relevant for Haredi draft evaders, post-2024 court rulings. Draft orders are issued. Repeated non-compliance leads to draft evader status. Common immediate measures. Arrest warrants. Military police can detain upon encounter with police. Travel bans. Cannot leave Israel. Or loss of state benefits/funding, yeshiva subsidies, and potential denial of other civil rights. Criminal prosecution. This also can lead to indictment in a military court. The law allows for imprisonment, and this is why, again, you're seeing a lot of these protests. General penalty range for the Defense Service Law for draft avoidance offenses is up to 2 to 5 years imprisonment. Article 46 covers certain evasion acts like falsifying information. In practice, for conscientiousness or Haredi refusers, sentences are often shorter, and repeated conscientious objectors, left-wing or pacifist youth, frequently receive 30 to 90 days per refusal, sometimes served multiple times, 197 days total over several terms in one documented case. So again, they know that they're not going to have to be in jail long, really. Okay, and it's very much like the U.S. military, except in America, if you refuse the draft, then same kind of thing. You're going to jail for at least 2 to 5 years. Disciplinary versus criminal. Initial non-reporting may start as disciplinary, limited punishment, no criminal record, but persistent refusal escalates to military court with criminal conviction. Enforcement has intensified since Supreme Court's 2024 ruling and post-October 7th manpower needs, but political coalitions and practical limits, prison capacity, affect full application, especially for the Haredi. In summary, the foundation statute is the 1986 Consolidated Defense Service Law rooted in 1949 legislation. Penalties center on administrative restrictions escalating to imprisonment, typically months per incident for refusers, up to several years maximum, with growing emphasis on criminal enforcement for non-compliance. So again, they know that they're not going to spend a lot of time in jail if they just, were to refuse something like this. Okay, again, this is just for May. This article's from the Times of Israel itself. This is from May 24th, 2026, not too long ago. Haredi parties reject latest draft exemption bill, setting stage for September election. Spiritual leader of the Ultra-Orthodox faction believes Netanyahu has no intention of letting the bill pass into law, is instead trying to use it for a larger electoral maneuver. The Knesset's ultra-Orthodox parties have rejected the latest draft on the coalition's Haredi conscription exemption bill, Channel 12 reported on Sunday, calling the future of the controversial legislation into question. The latest hurdle to the bill's passage means it is likely that the two Haredi parties in the Knesset, United Torah Judaism and Shas, will continue pushing to bring elections forward by about a month, likely to September 15th, in the middle of high holidays, as they have increasingly tied two issues together. The rejection of the bill by the Haredi parties came hours after the Hebrew media outlets reported that the leadership of the Knesset Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee was preparing to distribute an updated draft of the controversial legislation to lawmakers. The legislation, which would ostensibly increase military conscription for the Haredi community, but ultimately enable continued exemptions for full-time yeshiva students, is widely seen as legally dubious and laden with loopholes. The bill has generated intense resistance even among members of the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition, and was briefly taken off the table in March with the outbreak of the U.S.-Israeli war with Iran. However, the Knesset Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee Chairman Boaz Bismuth later announced that he would continue to push the bill through, although it failed to progress due to a last-minute disagreement with the United Torah Judaism Party's Degel HaTorah faction's rabbinic leadership over the bill's contents. Netanyahu later informed the Haredi parties that the coalition did not have a majority to pass the controversial legislation and suggested waiting until after the 2026 elections. When the Haredi parties rejected that opinion and began to push for the dissolution of the Knesset earlier this month, the bill was once again put back on the parliamentary agenda as the perimeter sought to win them back over. At the same time, Netanyahu began putting pressure on the coalition MKs opposed to the legislation to come around and support it. So again, this image right here, you can kind of see the same thing. Ultra-Orthodox Jews, they're protesting this entire bill. Despite the premier's efforts, however, a spokesman for Rabbi Dov Lando, the spiritual leader of Degel HaTorah, told the Times of Israel on Sunday that he had instructed MKs from his faction not to advance the bill at this time. The implication was that Lando does not believe the exemption law will actually end up passing, and that the recent push to advance it through the Knesset is part of a larger electoral maneuver on Netanyahu's part. The leading Haredi rabbi previously told lawmakers last week not to get drawn into political games. The ultra-Orthodox parties have been pushing to dissolve the Knesset over the failure to pass an exemption bill they deem to be satisfactory and reportedly favor an election date in early September. Lawmakers voted unanimously last week in favor of the parliamentary reading of a government-backed bill to dissolve the Knesset, potentially triggering slightly earlier elections if ultimately passed into law. The dissolution does not specify an election date, although elections must be held within 5 months of it passing, which would mean mid to late October at the latest. Elections must in any case be held by October 27th. Over 79,000 conscription orders have been issued by 2 ultra-Orthodox men since the High Court of Justice ruled in 2024 that they were obligated to enlist after the law allowing for blanket exemptions expired the previous year. Since that time, only 2,100 have enlisted, while the police have avoided arresting those who have ignored enlistment orders. Between January 2025 and January 2026, only 17 ultra-Orthodox men were proactively arrested by police for draft evasion. According to the IDF, there are currently around 32,000 people classified as draft evaders, while another 50,000 have received a formal warning ahead of the formal declaration by the government as draft evaders, and the number of evaders could soon climb as high as 80 to 90,000. The military has repeatedly warned that after more than 2 years of war, it is facing a severe manpower shortage. So when you look at that entire article, you're seeing kind of where things are standing when it comes to the current state of Israel. Ultra-Orthodox protests block roads and trains across Israel over military draft. Tens of thousands of ultra-Orthodox demonstrated across Israel on Monday, blocking roads and trains and setting cars on fire to protest mandatory enlistment in Israel's military. Why? Why don't you want to fight in your own war to, honestly, insane. But, it's kind of the same thing as if you were to say they would be similar to the left here in America who would not want to be drafted, right? We have our own draft here in the United States where you have men that are my age up to like 45 who are now able to be drafted. And again, men who have already served in the military who are being stop-lossed, which is essentially being brought back into the military. It's ruining lives, But for the difference is that these people, these ultra-Orthodox Jews, again, they're refusing to fight in their own military because they don't want to fight at all. And again, these are people who want to focus mainly on Torah study and rabbinical study, and they believe that that is their duty, is the spiritual side of Judaism, and they don't want to lose that religious history behind them, right? All of those things. Tens of thousands of ultra-Orthodox demonstrated across Israel on Monday. And again, Israel's police said demonstrators blocked major intersections and attacked a soldier who disembarked from a bus near a protest. Police struggled to control the crowds with water cannons and horses. We just watched all of those clips. The protest largely crippled the country's center, with highways closed and public transportation halted by the massive crowds in both Jerusalem and the Tel Aviv metro area. Military service is compulsory for most Jewish men and women in Israel. The politically powerful ultra-Orthodox parties have won exemptions for their followers to forego military service and instead study in religious seminaries. But those exemptions are under a threat. Many Israelis are tired of the long-standing system that has allowed ultra-Orthodox men to skip military service at a time when the military is stretched to its breaking point, and many served multiple tours of reserve duty. The issue is tearing apart Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's governing coalition, possibly moving elections up by several weeks this fall after the ultra-Orthodox parties withdrew their support for Netanyahu. Each year, roughly 13,000 ultra-Orthodox men reach their conscription age of 18, but less than 10% enlist, according to the parliamentary committee. Faced with several shortages of soldiers, the military is looking to extend the period of mandatory service. Most Jewish men are required to serve nearly 3 years of military service, followed by years of reserve duty. Jewish women serve 2 mandatory years. The public is determined. They see this as a war for their lives, said Israel Troper, a demonstrator in Jerusalem. From their perspective, going into the Israeli army means giving up religion. We don't want to give up our religion, so from our perspective, it's a war for our lives. He added that there is no way to force tens of thousands of people vehemently to oppose to the idea to serve in the military. Some protesters held signs condemning Israel, saying, "We would rather die as Jews than live as Zionists." Again, we watched that footage in the last video. We refuse to serve an army for the sake of the Zionist religion. Again, that was another, so we saw that clip. The Ultra-Orthodox, who make up roughly 13% of the Israeli society and are the fastest growing sector, have traditionally received exemptions if they are studying full-time in religious seminaries. The exemptions date back to the birth of the state in 1948, when a small number of students sought to revive the Jewish scholarship system after it was decimated by the Holocaust. Those exemptions and the government stipends many seminary students receive up to the age of 26 have infuriated many Israelis. Israel is currently maintaining a simultaneous military presence in Gaza, Lebanon, and Syria, in addition to fighting a war with Iran, which has stretched its robust military to the breaking point. So again, a lot of that is for the Greater Israel Project, we have to understand. The Supreme Court and the exemptions were illegal in 2017, but reported extensions and government delay tactics have left them in place. Among Israel's Jewish majority, mandatory military service is largely seen as a melting pot and rite of passage. Many in the insular ultra-Orthodox community fear that military service would expose young people to secular influences. So again, when we look at all of this, it's insane. So look at some of this other footage that we're looking at on X, and you'll see what we're saying. Okay, so again, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if this information has been useful for you. I think it's quite interesting personally, because again, it's like, why not fight in your own war? So again, we see this footage. In Jerusalem. Pretty wild. And again, they are saying that they don't want to lose their religion. I really think that they just don't want to fight. Ultimately, they don't want to fight. They don't want to fight Hezbollah. They know that Hezbollah is a powerful military, and they would rather just sit back and watch. They'd rather let the United States military go over there and fight their wars for them. Quite honestly, that's what's happening. Same thing with Iran. They don't want to fight Iran. They want the U.S. military to do it. They want a bunch of guys like me to go over there and fight and do it. Pretty insane. So again, that's just one clip from the protest there. A lot more coming out. Again, pretty wild though. This is just yesterday. So you got guys being arrested for a lot of this stuff. Crazy. You got more footage here. Oh man, they're not getting rid of them. Yeah, and so we see a lot of this happening over here in the United States as well when it comes to more of the left. These are a bunch of Zionist Jews that got together. It looks like they're, again, anti-religious coercion. Our life here is becoming impossible, one sign says in the audience. So it looks like they're doing... See a lot of these guys holding Torahs. And you have the IDF here, also Jews, who are saying, hey, you guys got to fight with us. We shouldn't have to be fighting for you. So very interesting to see how that all works, right, when we see this entire war going on. Pretty crazy. They don't want to fight in their own war. What's up with that? Ultimately, pretty wild. So what do you think about all of this? Pretty crazy to see. As the war ramps up and as the Iranians refuse to back down and Hezbollah continues to fight back and really Hezbollah in the media and Hamas have been seen as the enemies of this war, but really, I mean, ultimately, we've been seeing the Israelis bombing Christian villages up in southern Lebanon. And they are saying that they want this for a security buffer zone, is what Netanyahu is saying. And a lot of these anti-Zionists, now they're somewhat anti-Zionist, so they say, and they're against this, not because they really care, but because they actually don't want to fight in the war. Female suspect claimed she was stoned by the crowd. Police checkpoint where an investigation is now underway. Despite the Knesset voting 56-43 to advance a bill for military conscription, protesters continued blocking highways nationwide. So, pretty wild events, wild things happening in Israel today, Tel Aviv. And you're seeing a lot of these protests happening here in the United States as well, New York City in particular. Brooklyn, New York, or Lakewood, New Jersey are pretty big locations for these Jewish communities. So what do you guys think about all of this? Do you guys support it? Do you guys support the end of this war with Iran? Ultimately, we can only hope that that happens. But that's all I got. I thought that was interesting, to say the least. What do you guys think? Leave your comments in the comment section below. And again, if you want to work with me in real estate, you want to work with me, you want to grow your business, Gold Shark Media AI, then again, contact me. Click the links in the description below. Again, follow me on social media. You can follow my shorts, see what's happening in the daily news. That is where we cover all of the updates on the war and everything that's new today. So, again, without further ado, be sure to do that. And stay prudent, stay powerful, and stay wealthy. We'll be back at 7 p.m. Eastern Time tonight, covering all of the major events in the war today. See you next.